Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending our Capstone presentation. We are the first of 3 Capstone presentations based in Kenya from CLTL 7.0. The title of our project is Stories and Local Knowledge to Support Grevy Zebra and Samburu, or help Grevy Zebra. This research took place in Samburu, Kenya. And we worked with Grevy Zebra Trust. Grevy zebra are the only endangered species of zebra. They are listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List, and they have experienced over a 50% decline in population in the last 3 decades. There are about 2,000 adult individuals left on the planet, primarily in Kenya here. Samburu County, where we worked, is highlighted in green here, and there's a small disconnected population in Ethiopia up here, with a little bit on the southern border. Some of the major threats to Grevy zebra include water and pasture scarcity, primarily due to drought and climate change, as well as overgrazing, competition for resources primarily with humans and livestock, which mostly are water and grass, and then diseases, which we'll talk about quite a bit, and poaching in some areas.
Great. So in this presentation, we will be talking a lot about kindergarten behavior. Now, this behavior was first described by Klingel in 1974. It's when mothers leave their foals to go in search of water. After the mothers get their water, they do return back to the foals. And the reason that they do this is that the mothers, the lactating mothers, do have an increased need for water. It occurs a lot during the drier months. So when the Grevy zebra are more taxed for resources, and it actually reduces foal mortality, because the more that the foals are having to move, the more likely they are to get predated and pass away. GZT, or Grevy Zebra Trust, was concerned that Grevy zebras might not be exhibiting this behavior in their community conservancies any longer. The Grevy Zebra Trust, or GZT, is who we did pair with for this project. Their area of operation is highlighted on this map, all these different colors. They are a community-based organization, and they have a wide diversity of programs. So they employ a lot of females as their scouts. They also have bursaries or scholarships for students. They have a sanitation pad program where they employ women to create these sanitation pads so that girls do not have to miss school for any reason. And there's a lot of other programs that they carry out. They have a camp that is based just outside of Archer's Post. And for our project, we really focused in the Wamba region, which is the green region, and then specifically in that square that Tim is pointing out.
So our project consists of 3 separate parts. You'll hear us refer to it maybe as the 2018 data set, 2014 data set, and the Scout data set. The 2018, which the scope is shown here, was the data that we collected in storytelling sessions this summer. This is a zoomed-in map of where we were working and the 10 communities that we conducted sessions with. There were 5 in Westgate Conservancy and 5 in Levi. We conducted sessions with 2 to 4 individuals belonging to the same social group. So the social groups are typically elders or older men, Moran, who are younger men, typically unmarried, and women. And these social groups share a lot of the same responsibilities and maybe perspectives. So we split these sections out so we could compare across social groups. We asked them 14 questions which fit into 4 different categories: pastoralist behavior, community perceptions, Grevy zebra and Samburu culture, and kindergarten behavior. GZT, when we originally spoke with them, wanted us to focus on kindergarten behavior and gather some social data to figure out if this behavior is still occurring in these communities. And the reason that these communities specifically we spoke to is because foaling happens in very high densities right around these communities. So if there's anybody that's going to see a lot of foaling and Grevy zebra behavior related to raising young offspring, it's going to be these communities. We also provided each session a question and answer period following our discussions, and this was to try to level the playing field, give them opportunities to voice any questions, concerns, or provide us any more information. While these were not recorded and coded, so there's not quantitative data on the Q&A sessions, we heard a lot of information, and it influenced our project quite a bit. And then there's a breakdown of participants here. It's pretty even across social groups as well as conservancies. Whoa. Sorry.
So that's fun.
Deep breath.
Okay, we're back. So in addition to the data that we collected ourselves, we were given 2 data sets from GZT. This first data set was the Scoured Data, and it included data from 2006 through 2018. They are currently still collecting data, and this is an example of what the scouts will fill out. So it's a sheet that really the scouts will be looking for how many Grevy zebras there are, how many foals, how many females and males. They also look at whether wildlife, livestock, settlement, or water is present, and what habitat density is seen. For our analysis, we did clean up the data and find that 2006 and 2018, as they were given to us, did not contain enough observation points. And so we really focused on 2007 to 2017. And this ended up with about 28,400 plus observations over 12 locations. We analyzed this with 3 goals in mind: to provide GZT and Scouts with input on how to better improve their data collection through showing how it has been collected and maybe where there's some gaps in the collection. We then wanted to provide a general overview of observations made in the Scout data, so what's easily ascertained from this data. And finally, analyze Scout data for the presence of kindergarten behavior.
We were also provided a data set similar to our own social data that was collected in 2014. This was conducted by external researchers under GZT, and they asked 18 interview questions to 14 communities and 209 participants. This data had been coded, but it was not analyzed. So the goals for this data set were to analyze this coded data and then provide recommendations to GZT based on these results. And this also gave us a lot of cultural context and helped explain some of the things that we collected, or some of the information we collected in 2018. And here are the ages of participants from that data. Okay, so rather than talking about these 3 data sets separately, we're going to discuss our information in a few different themes, and then 2 or more of these data sets will contribute to each one of these themes. So like I said before, GZT wanted us to focus on kindergarten behavior, so this was influenced a lot by our 2018 data and then also the Scout data. So one of the questions that we asked communities was to share a story when they saw Grevy zebra foal left alone in a group while their mothers went to find water. And this table shows the responses to that. One note for this presentation, for the sake of time, we're not going to go over a lot of these quotes, but we did provide some quotes direct from our sessions. So about 3/4 of participants from all 3 social groups mentioned or told us a story which confirmed that they have observed kindergarten behavior before. And what we thought was really interesting is a lot of times they provided information that reflected what academic publications have also observed. They understood that mothers need to leave their foals to get water so that they can produce milk for their offspring. They also mentioned that they observed foals left with territorial males quite a bit. Mothers will leave the male's territory to find water, then come back. She will leave often while the foals are sleeping or when they're very young or have low energy. Some literature has noted that she will leave after nursing because the foals have less energy at that time. And that they observe it during the dry season. So we thought that this really spoke to the validity of traditional ecological knowledge and felt really confident in the information they were providing us, because obviously they were not reading these publications, but they were telling us a lot of things that have been observed for the last 4 or 5 decades. And there were a small percentage of people who had not observed the behavior before. So we asked some details about what they observed when they saw kindergarten. We asked what time of year, which season they observed this behavior. 60% of participants saw this behavior during the dry season, which is similar to what academic literature has said. And then 70% have said that when we asked how long did it take the mothers to return to their foals, most people said that they rush to water very quickly and will return within 1 hour, with very few people saying that it took her more than 1 hour to return. And while the academic literature does not give us an average travel time for kindergartening, kindergartens have been observed for up to 8 hours. We also were trying to figure out why this behavior has changed over time. So we asked about Grevy zebra drinking behavior during drought. And most participants, 58%, said that Grevy zebra drink water at night during drought. Some people said during the day, and about 10% specified that they will drink during the early morning hours. This is something that GZT has noticed a behavior change in Grevy zebra recently, and they thought it was due to competition for resources with people and livestock. These communities did confirm that Grevies will not often go to water sources while people and livestock are there. So it seems that the behavior change is due to this. However, one good piece of hope that we heard that was that when pastoralists see Grevies drinking water, they will wait until they have finished before they approach the water source with their livestock. Now, this behavior change might seem kind of weird, but we found that nocturnal drinking behavior is fairly common amongst large mammals that live on Africa's arid and semi-arid rangelands. It's a way to conserve energy, especially during the hot, dry months. So we think that it may be occurring because they can travel with their foals at night and the foals won't expend as much energy. However, traveling at night increases rates of predation because of nocturnal hunters, such as lions and leopards. So there are definite trade-offs. But from what we heard, it seems as if this is being caused by competition for resources.
Okay, so when we looked at the Scout data, how we were able to determine possible kindergarten behavior was by finding the difference between lactating female numbers and the number of foals present. Now we found 139 possible occurrences, and this has a frequency of about 0.5% in all of the data. So it's not very common. We did see a lot of occurrences that only had a difference of 1 foal. And kindergarten behavior can happen with as little as 1 foal, so all these were included. We also saw, the biggest difference that we saw was 10 additional foals, and this was seen in the dry season of 2016, and that was only seen 1 time. We did break down our numbers into both dry and wet season. because as I said earlier, kindergarten behavior happens during the drier months. And it's not really specified if this means only the dry seasons or during some of the drier months during the wet season, because you can have, if there's a drought, you can have drier months in the wet season. So we did include those. Now you may have noticed that I said possible kindergarten behavior. So since we were not physically there, we weren't able to 100% say that there was kindergarten behavior happening. So from this, we have created an actionable step for the Grevy Zebra Trust to include a kindergarten behavior option to the Scout worksheet. Now this would need some education from GZT to the Scouts on really what to look for kindergarten behavior, but we do feel that you can't definitively say that it is happening unless you're physically there. But the survey participants that we carried out, they in all 3 social groups have observed this kindergarten behavior. So with the possible kindergarten behavior that was seen through the Scout data, we did do some analysis to see some trends happening within the occurrences. So here it is broken out through the year. And the wet season is in blue and the dry season is in red. Now, you might notice that in both wet and dry season in 2015, there's a spike in occurrences. But also, as I said previously, in 2016, that dry season, when it kind of went down, that's actually when we had the biggest difference, the biggest foaling group happen. So that's something of interest. Also of interest is this spike in 2012 during the wet season. Like I said, foaling kindergarten could happen during some of the drier months of a wet season, and we feel that's most likely what happened here, but we would need to do a further comparison of annual rainfall for that year. Next, as Tim pointed out, said earlier, the literature and lots of our surveys said that kindergarten behavior can occur with a territorial male present. So we really looked at what the group makeup was when these occurrences are happening. And if you look at this chart, the percentage of kindergarten observations with a territorial male is actually less than 50%, and quite similar to the occurrences of kindergarten behavior with other females present. This last one right here just shows how many times kindergarten occurred with any adult or any juvenile present, and that's almost 75% of the time the foals were not completely alone. We also looked at if kindergarten behavior was happening with the presence of other wildlife, and with other wildlife that was occurring 42% of the time, right there. And we were comparing that to overall, looking at all the entries at a whole, how many times were wildlife present when Grevy zebra were seen at all, and that's 51%. So kind of similar. So from there we broke it down into species, what wildlife was being seen when Grevy zebra was being seen, and what wildlife was being seen when kindergarten was being seen. When any Grevy zebra was being seen, the most likely wildlife you would see would be Gerenuk, followed by ostrich, and then Grant's gazelle. When kindergartening occurred, the most likely wildlife you would see was actually ostrich, followed by Grant's gazelle, and then Gerenuk. So some slight differences there in their preferences. We then looked at livestock for the same reason, and there's a little bit more of a difference here, where when kindergarten was being seen, livestock was with them about 33% of the time. But overall, when Grevy zebra were seen, livestock was present about 48% of the time. Now there's less species of livestock, so less differences in that breakdown, but kindergartening was least likely to be seen with donkeys, where Grevy zebra as a whole was least likely to be seen with cattle.
So one thing that Jess and I noticed when we first began integrating into Samburu was the abundance of dogs that were out herding alongside pastoralists. And we thought that maybe because dogs have a similar body shape to a lot of the predatory animals on this landscape, such as wild dogs and hyenas, the recent increases in human population may have led to an increase in dog population, which may stress wildlife and may influence Grevy zebra behavior and kindergarten behavior. So this is something that we really wanted to ask communities. So we asked them 2 questions. Do you use a dog to herd? And then do Samburu use dogs now more than they have in the past? And these results are shown in this table. More than half of the participants said that there are fewer dogs used for herding now than in the past. Dogs now are used much more for security in the homestead, and people understand due to conservation knowledge that dogs do affect wildlife. Therefore, people are more hesitant to bring dogs out onto the rangelands. And also, dogs in the past fed themselves through hunting wildlife, and now dogs are fed in the homestead. We did hear quite often that there are more dogs in general, primarily because they no longer kill female dogs. With this information, we think that dogs should always be considered as a possible stressor for wildlife, but from what we heard, we don't think that this is something that's stressing Grevy zebra enough to change their behavior.
Okay, so another actionable step that came out of the kindergarten behavior would be that in the Scout data, we noticed that majority of the observations being taken occurred over in the medium habitat type. And what I mean by the medium habitat type is that this bar right here is taken from the Scoured Data sheet, and so this is how they quantify those habitat types, with this one being open, the middle being medium, and the far one being closed. Through our surveys, when we asked people what should Grevy zebra trusts know, lots of people said that they should know that Grevy zebra give birth and can be found with young foals in the denser habitats. So for this reason, we suggest more observations in this closed habitat to possibly see more kindergarten behavior or just more foal mother interactions in general.
So our next section is about cultural stories. We employed storytelling methods during our surveys, and our goal with this was to better understand the cultural role and significance and the ecological services that Grevy zebra provide to Samburu and pastoralists in Kenya. And this information can be used by GZT to better understand how people perceive Grevy zebra and use that to stimulate conservation action. So one of the questions we asked everybody was to share a story about Grevy zebra that they heard from a parent or elder, and these results are shown on the table here. Quite often we heard one of 2 songs, which Jess will talk about in the next slide. We heard often one of 3 cultural stories, the most frequent being that women in this culture used to own Grevy zebra and livestock and wildlife, where men primarily owned livestock. However, women lost Grevies and wildlife, therefore they no longer they have the responsibility or the ability to take care of livestock. So it kind of highlighted a challenge for women in this community. We also heard that Grevy zebra either mounting or neighing early in the morning indicates rain is soon to come, and that when Grevies are relaxing or laying down during the day, it indicates that there's going to be a mild dry season, so it's not going to be too severe. Some ecological services we heard is that the presence of Grevy zebra indicates safety, there are no predators around, and the direction that their ears are facing can indicate which direction danger might be. And then their tracks lead to water and pasture. So all in all, Grevy zebra really have kind of a positive symbology and symbolize rain, and water. And for communities living in an area that's ravaged by drought that's progressively becoming worse, an animal that symbolizes rain is going to be really important, very well valued. So we think that's positive, and GZT can use that in the future to stimulate conservation action.
Okay, so we also heard a lot about these two different songs. So the first one, Lutuko Koreana, was the one that we heard the most. And while we got the direct translation, people really give more stock into how they use the song and the explanation behind the song. So if a child is crying or acting in a way a mother would not like them to act, the mother sings this song to them and is basically telling the child, please stop that or the Grevy zebra will come and take you away. And the other song, Tenerio Siqueira Oyo, that song we really just heard one part of the song a lot, and it was the part that talked about how if a donkey brays, then a Grevy zebra brays in response, and this means that they are sisters and that they are talking to each other and that they are similar. The song in its entirety really talks about the other livestock and how they are also related to different wildlife. Next, we asked about cultural significance. And we asked about this because in the 2014 data, when people were asked, is traditional knowledge disappearing? 72% said yes, it is disappearing. And then 80% said that it is important to have this cultural knowledge for conservation. So we asked about the cultural significance behind Grevy zebra, and people overall said that they are a good indicator of rain, like Tim mentioned. Their skins are used to make belts and tobacco purses, and that they are similar to livestock, so that means like the donkey in the song. Next we asked, does the presence of Grevy zebra mean anything to you? And from this we heard that Grevy zebra indicate safety, they indicate good pasture, and that they indicate a movement between seasons. So this means that when the seasons change, when the rains come or when they go, the Grevy zebra move. So people know that the seasons are changing. Finally, we asked, does the presence of Grevy zebra tracks mean anything to you? So tracks can lead to water and pasture, people can follow them. Running tracks indicate that there was danger. And they can also be used to estimate population size to see how many tracks there are.
So with this information, the deliverable that we produced is a storybook. You guys can look at these if you'd like. This is a storybook, and then we'll talk about this in a moment. Something that we know from the 2014 data is that a lot of people feel as if cultural knowledge is disappearing. And then some social research in Kenya has shown that when children attend school, more children are attending school now than they have in the past. And they attend school, especially secondary school, in which they usually leave the area that they grew up in. They might not be hearing these stories, and they don't hear the traditional knowledge that has been used to manage their landscapes for millennia. So we produced a storybook inspired by the stories that we heard. And the goal was to share these stories in a place-based context with school children, to stimulate their conservation interests and knowledge, to preserve this cultural knowledge, and then to supplement their language learning. The final product will be in English and Kiswahili, which they both learn, or they learn both of. And then the plot is Samiri and Perio, which are the names of our translators. They don't get along very well, but they need to follow Grevy zebra to find water. And along their journey, they learn a lot about the species, and they become good friends in the end. So we're going to finalize this book in the coming months and send it back to GZT to distribute to local schools, partially as a thanks for them sharing information with us. And to give back to the communities, and also for GZT to build these relationships with these communities. Disease was originally not part of the scope of our project, but we heard about it quite a bit, so we decided to look into it a little bit more. This is a quote that is pretty descriptive of the topic of disease. Unlike anthrax, there's another one. Rather than producing any kind of fluid, it is difficult for Grevy zebra and donkeys to remove stool. That is the main disease attacking them. Then there's another called fever. It is affecting donkeys and the Grevy zebra. So we asked, how has Grevy zebra behavior changed in your lifetime? And then we followed up asking, why has Grevy zebra behavior changed in your lifetime? And these results are shown here. Most participants said that there's been a decrease in Grevy zebra population during their lifetime, and the top two reasons that they said were drought and disease, which were tied for first. Some other questions in which disease popped up. On the 2014 data, what challenges do Grevy zebra face in your communities? Disease was a frequent answer. When we asked, is there anything else you would like to add about Grevy zebra, we often heard about disease. And then during our question and answer session, we were both asked by groups if they knew of a remedy to these diseases or if we could find out and bring one back to the communities. So we were listening and the disease just kept popping up, so we decided to pursue it as a topic. So during our sessions, we heard about 3 diseases, most frequently this waste removal disease, which is currently undiagnosed and there's no remedy to the Samburu. We heard about anthrax, which is very well known in this region. There's a lot of publications about it, and the Kenya Wildlife Service has done a bit of work on anthrax. And then this fever disease, which is also undiagnosed. Grevy Zebra Trust is aware that there are undiagnosed diseases affecting donkeys and grevies. However, they have told us that they have not been able to investigate it further, so we took the opportunity to investigate diseases a little bit ourselves. When we heard about these diseases and people who owned donkeys that have died from especially the waste removal disease, we collected a little bit of symptom information. And we met with a KWS veterinarian named Dr. Stan Sheggy to create awareness about this and put this out to KWS that donkeys and grevies are struggling with these diseases. And this is a quote that is very indicative of all of our research. In this culture, you can't talk about zebra without talking about donkeys. That's crazy, right? So especially for the Samburu, Grevy zebra and plain zebra, I'm sure, and donkeys are one and the same. Rightfully so, they're part of the same phylum. Yes, genus.
Okay. So when we were talking with Dr. Shaggy, he told us about how it is difficult to get some veterinary diagnostic tools out into the more remote areas of Kenya. That vets are limited, and so this can be an issue. Grevy Zebra Trust is pairing with Owasso Alliance and Save the Elephant to create a diagnostic center where they will have a vet on staff. This diagnostic center will be located closer to Save the Elephants than Grevy Zebra Trust, so it is still a little bit away from the more remote areas. So we created a diagnostic tool that could be utilized by the GZT scouts that are already out in the field. They're living in the communities. This tool was based off of the scout sheet that they are already filling out, so a format that they already know. It was made for people that might not be the most literate or have the most education, so we did include pictures. And the theory behind this is that when someone has a sick donkey, they can bring it to a GZT scout, and the scout can look at their mouth, their eyes, their hooves, and for swelling. And swelling can indicate anthrax. They will also be looking at their eating and drinking habits, as well as waste. On the backside, we have left room for, because this is still a work in progress, we have left room at the bottom to put more symptoms in there. But so far we have this body scoring sheet, which is used by lots of animal healthcare professionals today. We also included people looking for prolapsed rectum, lethargy, and coughing. So our next section is community perceptions. So some of these questions were questions that came up in the 2014 data, and some were ones that GZT wanted us to ask the community about, just to see about their outreach and how the community felt about them and Grevy Zebra. So the first thing that Grevy Zebra Trust wanted to know was who's attending the conservation workshops and how many people are attending. Overall, there was a lot of participants that said that they did attend a conservation workshop. But then when we broke it down into communities, you can see Westgate has over an 80% has gone to a conservation workshop, where in Mayby, over 50% has not attended a conservation workshop. Additionally, if we break it down into social groups, while the majority of people have gone to conservation workshops, you can see in women and in Moran that there is a higher percentage of no's, of people who did not attend the workshop, with about 45% of women not attending workshops and a little over 40% of Moran not attending workshops.
So from this information, we developed a few actionable steps for Grevy Zebra Trust. The first is to provide more education and outreach in Mayby. Andrew Latora, who is the Wamba regional coordinator, told us that Mayby is much more populated and diverse than Westgate is. Also, GZT is located in Westgate, so it's easier for them to access these communities. So it'll be important, especially because so much falling happens in Mayby, to bring conservation education to those people that have not attended. And then we also heard quite a bit from Mayby residents that they are interested in establishing a buffer zone like Westgate. So this is an area where grazing is only permitted sometimes, and then later in the dry season, it's opened up for grazing, and this allows grass to replenish and not be overgrazed, and is beneficial for livestock and wildlife. And we think that's something tangible that Grevy Zebra Trust could pair with Mayby Conservancy to help them establish a buffer zone. Currently, they do not have one. Westgate has a core conservation area and a buffer zone. Next one is to engage women and consider the role that they play in their communities to develop education. So women represent 50%, if not more, of the population. Therefore, they're a very important group to target. And they have a close relationship with the natural resources that they use, and they use them a little bit differently than men do. And this primarily is water and wood. Women are responsible for collecting water, and they also gather wood, which is used to construct their houses and bomas and fencing around their villages. Women also sometimes burn charcoal and sell it as a source of revenue, and a study has shown that Samburu women typically only collect wood that is already dead, but if there's none available, they will chop down living trees, which in a lot of conservancies is not allowed. However, when they do have the conservation knowledge and know the importance of these trees, they are less likely to chop down live trees. So just working within that cultural context and targeting or developing education to target women specifically, and similarly to engage Moran and consider generational differences. One is education. Many more Moran now than in the past have attended primary school, so they may not have heard these stories or traditional knowledge, and they're the future leaders because they are men in this culture. They're going to be the primary decision makers in the near future, so it's really important to make sure that they have positive perceptions of their environment and conservation, especially because it's been shown that formal education may decrease positive perceptions. So 2 more actionable steps, which are derived from the 2014 data. Those researchers asked communities, what challenges do Grevy Zebra face in your community? Overall, people felt, or do Grevy Zebra face challenges? Most people felt that Grevy Zebra do face challenges. The 2 communities which know exceeded yes were Kalama and Yoroni, which we thought was interesting. Another question they asked was, do you think that traditional knowledge is disappearing in your culture? Most communities said yes. 100% of Kalama residents said yes, which is likely due to their close proximity to Archer's Post, so they have more exposure to changing cultures, modernization, westernization. So we think it's really important for them to identify why these two communities kind of feel like Grevy zebra don't face challenges anymore, and then to consider developing outreach and education based on this information. And then in general, to discuss cultural conservation with communities because they feel so strongly that culture is being threatened and Grevy zebra have positive symbology in this culture. It's going to be really important for GZT to let these communities know we're not only trying to conserve these species, but we want to conserve their culture and what it means. And I think that will stimulate a lot of positive perceptions towards GZT and a lot of pro-environmental behaviors in general.
Okay, so the last actionable step that we will talk about actually was not able to fit into the other themes, so we put it here. So this actionable step is to address inconsistencies in the Scout data. So we really looked at the Scout data for how it was being collected, when it was being collected, and where it was being collected. So in this first one, you can see by number of observations per year that the observations have steadily declined since 2014. And then in this observations by time, there's two different things that we can get from this graph, and that is, first of all, there's a lot of peaks that happen at the 0 or 5, and so that's like 10:05 or 10 o'clock. And but there's still a lot of noise in between those peaks. So what this says to us is that some of the scouts are rounding up to the nearest number and some are not. Additionally, it overall peaks at about 10:30 a.m. And because they are employing women to record this data, that is when women are available in the morning to first record this. It is after they are done with their morning duties, like getting the children off to school, cleaning the boma, and stuff like that, then they are able to take these observations. So it's up to GZT to decide if they want to make it a more even spread or to encourage women to take them throughout the day. And then we also looked at observations by location. So if you look at Mayby, it has a lot of observations, but Kipsing, not as many, and we still were able to compare those, but they, even though quite vary. Ones like Buffalo Springs Natural Reserve and Malaco, which only have one, could be for a GPS error, where the GPS might have just been reading the wrong coordinate. But other ones, like Nagaramara, have a significant enough amount that we don't think it was a GPS error, but also it's not enough to really compare against some of the bigger ones. So it's up to GZT to see if they want to tighten up the locations or create a more even spread across different locations.
So we'd like to extend a special thanks to quite a few people who made this possible. First and foremost, Andrew for supporting most aspects of our work. He was integral in coordinating these communities, driving us around, providing cultural context, answering 1 million of our questions, collaborating with our translators, maintaining team morale, and singing 90s hip hop in the car with us as we drive around. Our translators, Rose and Steve, they helped us create awareness in communities. They also provided context and answered a lot of our questions, and they were just great to work with. Sheila Funnel and Justine Cordingley, who work for GZT, for providing information necessary to complete our research. Eric, the GZT chef, for cooking us the best Kenyan food that we had and got to enjoy every day at GZT. And then the executive director of GZT, Belinda, and the entire staff for our life-changing opportunity. We couldn't have done it without them. Here's some references, and reflections. So I'll start off with a reflection. One thing that I found has probably been the best tool for diving into something like this is having empathy and trying to see things from other people's perspectives. Before this trip, I'd never been to Kenya or Africa or outside of North America, so it was quite a big change. And during our question and answer sessions, I was asked quite a few times, why did you choose Grevy zebra to do research on? And I mean, I grew up watching Animal Planet and Nat Geo, and I had this very romanticized view of animals. I've always wanted to work with endangered species, and this was a great opportunity for that. But my view of why I want to work with endangered species is so different from the stories that we heard. You know, these stories, this is Grevy zebra are part of their culture, they're part of their stories, they're part of their successes as pastoralists, they're used by them. So it was kind of funny, like trying to compare and understand their perspectives, because I have such an intrinsic view of animals and why we should conserve them, but they want to conserve them for different reasons. So just trying to empathize with that. And then also, I remember writing my application for CLTL and mentioning how much I think that being exposed to like true global poverty is going to change my perspectives of the world. But being there, I realized too that their exposure to us is just as important. I think one of the biggest epiphanies for me, I spent a night or a few nights at one of our friends' houses out there, and got to talk to a few of his friends who are around our age, and got to watch TV, see kind of like the social, the media and the social media that they're exposed to, and there's so much that we need to share. And I went like, this is going to help me understand things, but I didn't consider until I was there how much of an impact I'm having on them, especially because a lot of Samburu are never going to be able to travel very far from their homes, and their exposure to us kind of introduces, it humanizes maybe Europeans and Americans, because they obviously have perceptions and stereotypes of us. It was very obvious that they think we were very frail, and and that we have a hard time dealing with the rugged lifestyles of the Samburu. So kind of just the exposure goes both ways, and I think this experience has helped me kind of get out of my own, how I look at things, and better understand how people see me and interpret me and the benefits that we get from each other.
Okay. And then I went into this experience with a very big background in working with animals. And I grew up watching Disney and seeing the animated animals that all have great backstories, and we all know them by name, and aren't their stories so cute to share to children? So I thought when we would be asking for cultural stories, that every story we were going to get was just going to be like ready for Disney and ready for children to just enjoy and uplift both zebras and the community. Not the case. Some stories, like the one about how women lost Grevy zebra, are a little bit harder, because men are actually still kind of using that story to tell women, no, you can't own livestock. You lost your livestock, which was the wildlife. That's why it's wild. So you can't own this. I need you to move our whole house, but you can't use my donkey because your donkey's out there. And that was actually, a woman said that to me. She's like, oh yeah, my husband always jokes with me that I can't use his donkey. I'm like, oh, that's, so that was something very different, that not every story creates this positive, happy, feel-good feeling. Also, the song Lutiko Kuiana isn't the most positive either. It's sung towards children that are misbehaving, and literally translated, it talks about how they killed a Grevy zebra foal, so now the Grevy zebra wants revenge and will take your child. So there's a little bit of some darkness in that. People are able to laugh and just joke about it. Whenever this woman's story came up, there was always laughter amongst the women when I was talking to the women, that they thought it was a funny thing, like, I'm not allowed to have this stuff because of this. And to that really kind of affected me, because as a woman, like, well, I don't know if I would let like a cultural story tell me I can't own that donkey right there. But it's a part of the culture, and I have to be sympathetic of it, and nothing's gonna change overnight. And for women to advocate more for themselves, it takes the women within those communities. It takes the women that are there, the women that are like, you know what, I am gonna own this donkey, or spin the story and be like, you're right, we do own the wildlife, so I'm gonna conserve the wildlife. I get to work with GZT because they work with Grevy zebra, and Grevy zebra are mine. So kind of finding ways to spin these stories and to help promote different women empowerment was also something very big for me. Also, as a woman there, I was told, in this picture you can see kind of that I'm wearing pants. This was during one of the piloting sessions. I was told I needed to wear a skirt so I could look more like a woman. And, you know, I had gone to Sierra Training Post, gotten all these rugged pants. I was ready to do some field work. So then I had to go find some skirts and figure out how to get in and out of a truck in my skirt. It was a high truck. It worked, but it's I had to use him as a shield sometimes, but it was fine. So just some of those cultural things that it's like you just have to learn to be open to, and people are gonna tell you to wear a skirt to look more like a woman. They might ask you inappropriate questions about your marital status, about all sorts of stuff like that, and just kind of having that open communication and allowing cultures to surround you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.